Okay, I like talking about the dawn of civilization and humankind, where everything comes from. I tried to go past the Bible and things like that. I've really laid off that lately because a personal friend had a loss, and just gonna want to steer away that from a while. But I like talking about what we have found out and what's changed, especially in my lifetime, in our thoughts of these things about dawning of civilization. For if you've been checking out my channel or you know about this yourself, it went from being about 2200, 2500, 3200 BC, and if you tried to talk about anything before that, it was impossible. But here in this last little bit here, wouldn't have been able to push it back. And if you look up in now agriculture, it says it goes back over 10,000 BC, and so that equates to a time at Göbekli Tepe. And after finding that, that's quite a vindication. And quite a bit of my videos here recently have been vindication videos where I've mouthed off and said things and tried to make connections and everything, and then I'll go ahead and here's a video of these other guys showing you that. They just found it. So, but for years I seem to be somewhat stagnated other than new finds about dawns of humankind and things until suddenly, well, genetics, and DNA took their place on the stage here. For all of a sudden, whenever you get into DNA and genetics, it'll make a whole lot more connections than people trying to make perspective ideals on which pottery came before what and who was connected to who. And really, if they can't find a body in exact cranial forms and everything, they say, oh, not the same, and they tried to act like, oh, there's just all these deviations. But genetics steps up to the plate and it tells you something different. And we talk about a lot of different places, and I'd like to get into depth if they could ever find some royalty of Sumer and take some of those people and try to do the same thing that they've done for other places like Egypt, but also the people that are found in Turkey and also Proto-Indo-Europeans and so on. And they've really done enough of this that they've got a database now they're going off of, and we're going to look at some genetic information that correlates this data. So where are we going to look at? Well, everybody looks like civilization comes up like popcorn out of nowhere, but one of the more famous ones, other than Sumer and Anatolian and so on, is of course the ancient Egyptians. There's been a lot of perspective ideas on that, and who built these pyramids. This is the top of the Great Pyramid where it still has its smooth part that's on it. Couldn't really climb that. It'd be a whole lot more dangerous and fall down. Look at the height of that thing up over above ground. Hope this is showing up well. So we're going to talk about who built these ancient monoliths and temples. Temples to Leo and Sphinx, and ancient giant monoliths, Ares, and things that correlate with time, and even great queens that they had at the time. And so we take a look back at the information we had before genetics stepped up to the plate real quick, just to kind of get a brush up on it. You find people like this. This is a statue of Horaha. Now, Horaha is supposed to come from the very first dynasty. He would have been the second pharaoh ever after a proposed Narmer. And then the first dynasty comes and so on. They talk about. There's been a lot of people that tell you that this guy could be Scorpion, and how all that worked out was really more like this. And they don't truly find a Menez type thing as much as they find a verification for Narmer and his offspring and Horus the Younger and this Horaha. And it looks like that might have a better connection than anything. Now they found this wood statue that are a lot like others we're about to look at too, but this is a death or a Ka statue of a pharaoh type. This is Horaha again, but they found it in a 12th dynasty. So if you look, he's got these crystal blue eyes that I've made a bunch of other videos where it's inside there, and one's about exclusively it because it is quite a unique thing. And these eyes follow you around the room. You get in the right angle like we are about right now, and they turn bluish to you. They're kind of blue-gray, and they look like real eyes. They're a lens, and there's a separated space behind it and a circle with a dot that's in it, and it makes it look like a real pupil, and they kind of follow you around the room. And they only did this through the 12th dynasty. And to be honest, the reason they say 12th dynasty is because they found this in with a bunch of stash stuff that was in 12th dynasty. Yet, he apparently comes from that time from before, and they might have had this statue from a long time back, and after extensive looting, it's one of the things that was left. After this point, they only find one other blue-eyed statue that I'm aware of, and it's Nefertiti herself, that perfect icon statue that everybody knows about. They recently did a recreation of. Well, she only has one eye left, the other's gone, but that one eye that left is also blue, but it's not as light blue as some of these you're going to find. It's more of a darker blue, and they seem to have been selected to match in most cases, as well as they could. And so it's pretty neat. But so here's one look at that, and you'd say, well, that guy. Well, here's another guy known as Mitri, and he's an early scribe. Now, he would have been from the 4th dynasty, right here, and you can see he has a little pencil mustache right above his lip still, but I've showed him in other videos too, and he has more of a violet blue eyes. Isn't that neat? And this is scribes also, but then scribes come from nobility and so on, and then I did a video about just scribes and how they pass down, how they make their paints that nobody knows about, special from father to son, and all these things. And he describes what he can do and how he can draw all these different creatures and all their forms and make them look like they're moving and do all these things. The artisan work that he describes out who he is. And this is on his death thing, kind of funerary. So it's kind of neat describing who he was. And so it's not just a simple little epitaph. It's like, I had all this going on and all this crap. But you never see that again until you have it in the tomb. Well, he was professing it to himself and to God for all time too. So is there only a few of these? No, there's a whole bunch of them, and his eyes may be a slightly different color, but they're blue too. And this is known as the seated scribe. He's famous, and you can find most of these in the Cairo Museum. And this is again a plaster type statue, and we're going to see some faces like that here in just a few that haven't been plastered over and then painted, and the eyes gouged out and then inserted in. For that eye thing is a whole insert, and the white part of the eye is a special type of granite type material or quartzy type material that has a little red vein in it, just like your eyes would, and so they use that for the outer part of it. And know there's a big frame around it and everything, but then they put that kohl around their eyes, and so it looked like mascara. And if you put that Egyptian eye on men or women, they kind of look like this, or like you remember from the 10 Commandments and stuff like that. So that's more of a correct representation, but you can see also that they're blue-eyed. Here's another scribe. But also some of their women. But notice how that's not red ochre like the color that the males were. For the females are drawn pale in most cases, and we'll see some more of that here in a minute. This is no fret, and in a minute we'll see her husband. And she also has those blue eyes. But it's nothing weird, this symbology that goes on. For a male that's always out working is going to have quite the tan, and farming and all these things that they did, hunting and so on. Whereas if they have everything going on like the Egyptians did, the women are able to stay inside and keep themselves paler. And at this time, and all the way through to a modern time, people like to keep themselves pale. When I was a kid, everybody was crazy about tanning and trying to be out in the sun again, and it was a hippie thing and everything else, and copper tone, and every chick was showing you their tan lines and ha ha ha. But nowadays we're back to putting on some sunscreen a little bit. But hey, you remember back in the England French times, they powdered themselves and tried to keep themselves very pale. You can see these blue eyes that are here, and she's wearing a wig over her other regular hair, and they even represented it on the statue. So this is her husband, Rahotep, and of course in the words it just says that she's like his female acquaintance. So it doesn't necessarily da-da-da, but it doesn't give her the epitaph because she didn't ever become queen because he didn't become king. He's Prince Rahotep, and so it would have been his older brother. People can figure out who all these people are, and of course they've got epitaphs around him and so on. And even these reserve heads I'm fixing to show you will show it. That's a little bright and glary, isn't it? But you can see a mustache on him. This is one I've always liked. It may not even look as good as other ones, but then this is copper. And there have been people said that the actual element, copper that you put together to make bronze, may have been somewhat named about him, but everybody says that it's about Capri. And now they had made it out of that, right? That there was a mine in Capri where they were doing this type of stuff. But copper goes back to, anyhow, the reason I like this is it really looks like my dad in his 40s. I'm serious. I've got a picture of my dad just about at this angle, and this is one of those pictures, and I've described it too whenever it shows it, and I even see other pictures, and I go, that's not the one, but this is the one, and it looks very much like my dad about 40s. He had a look kind of like Dean Martin, but a rounder face, not so much of a long face. There's blue eyes in him also. So there's only a certain amount of genetics that go along with people that, of course, have this phenotype and have this look and have blue eyes, but it gets better. For a lot of these people had red hair and blonde hair too, not just dark hair, even though a lot of the wigs were made out of dark hair. There's somewhat a reason for that, but let's look at these reserve heads and see if you can tell the phenotype and what these people look like. And these are of the earliest dynasties, like 3rd and 4th dynasty. Through the 5th, I think, is where this goes from. And so this would have been princes who might have been upcoming kings, but weren't quite going to be. I don't know, you just look at things like this and you can tell a phenotype. It almost looks elven to me there. Of course, with this little hair that just is an outline on the top rim of the thing, it looks like he's wearing a skull cap or he's some kind of elf, but his ears got knocked off. Well, all you got to do is knock this thing over, and if it has an ear, it'd come right out of that gouge that looks there, but pretty easy to see who these people were. And of course this is the earliest dynasties again, so there's no question where things came from. And so when people say, oh well, they came from farther up the Nile and so on, well, we'll get into that point too here in a second. But so we've always looked at these types of things. You can see the profile, but then all of a sudden DNA steps up to plate and it has a little bit more to talk about. Let's see, let's try to catch it at a darker moment like that. This is said in a journal, an actual professional paper that's been peer reviewed from geneticists who are figuring all this out after getting a myriad of genetics together. And again, there's almost no arguing about pottery. In fact, this settles a lot of the old fights that everybody had for 35 years on who, and then did they have trade with them, or were they part of them, or were they the same people in the first place, or what goes on. Well, the fact that U5 is the dominant mitochondrial haplogroup found among hunter-gatherers in Europe, and the covering of haplogroup U5B25 or B2B5 sequence from the 12th dynasty mummy of Yehudi Nakht, the observed U5 lineage could potentially reflect the interactions between Egypt and the Near East that date as far back as the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods. There's a lot in that statement to unpack. Let's just try to do it simply here. When we talk about early hunter-gatherers, or EEHG, that's early European hunter-gatherers, and we've recently talked about how that's really used to be talked about and talked as Cro-Magnon men. It made you think of the, oh, isn't that the cave painting guy from 35,000 years ago? Well, yes. It actually goes back at least 48,000 that they've confirmed could go back farther than that, but yeah, he's with all those different caves. In fact, they've taken one from Puglisi Cave, which is one of those caves with some art in it and things, and found a Cro-Magnon man. And due to using their new techniques to find old DNA, and one of them is a special bone up inside your head that is a pocket where certain, if I understand it correctly, a little bit of marrow would stay, and it doesn't have a way of going out in any way and deflating out, so you always end up with some little chip inside there, and because it's not been manipulated in any way, shape, or form, it actually holds it better longer. In fact, somebody said recently, if we could find that bone in dinosaurs and da-da-da, we'd be a whole lot more on our way to Jurassic Park, he. When we talk about early European hunter-gatherers, at Puglisi Cave at 29,000 BC, they've gotten the genome out of these guys, and it still exists today in modern Europeans. Pretty much that's where it is, and small pockets left. We'll get to that more later, but so they tell you that because they found this back in the 12th dynasty, way back when, in Old Kingdom, this observed U5 lineage could potentially reflect interactions between Egypt and the Near East and date far back as pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods. They have a way of looking at genomes and actually seeing when the interaction happened and things like that, and also that apparently they are comparing this to other ones they found in Anatolia and so on that they already know are early European hunter-gatherers. And then they go, well, that's these people. You see how they make the Sherlock Holmes on this. They're not just using these samples, but they're going, well, that looks like the samples from here and these other ones that we're well aware of, as opposed to what some people might think. And how far does it date back? Well, it dates back pre-dynastic and at least early dynastic periods. This is going on here too. It's really just a verifier of what we just saw. And this is in a thing from 2019, a paper, and it's called Biological Sexing of a 4,000-year-old Egyptian mummy head, access to potential of nuclear DNA recovery from the most damaged and limited forensic specimens. So they were able to, one of their first attempts at getting this ancient DNA, they said, well, look, here's this dude and his head fell off and da-da-da and everything else. He dates the 12th dynasty. We know who he is and da-da-da. So try to do that out of it. Since you're going to be kind of intrusive, just take his head and do the little thing you're talking about. And they go, pow. And they know that it hasn't been tampered or anything else, and it doesn't match anybody who was in contact with it. Same situation with the Cro-Magnon man that's really now known as early European hunter-gatherers. So there's something that's quite revealing, I guess you'd say. Shocking to some people. But it's common under them. And I believe U6 also has been found under there. But we also know that these same people had come down and flooded not too long ago. Now we look at a picture like this, and this is on paper, papyrus, so they're not drawn red ochre, but males are drawn darker and females are drawn pale again. And you can find that in the red ochre symbology in the ancient Minoans and the Mitanni people that live up where you would call the Colchian people and Anatolian and so on, that Herodotus even said were just like the Egyptians. And it wasn't anything special of their look for everybody around there, and he even says it looks like that kind of, but there's nothing special about that. But they noted that they had certain rituals, the way they did their fabric, and the fact that they did circumcision, pointed it out to them. Then they talked about it, and each one knew each other. The Egyptians less than the Colchians, and da-da-da, and he goes off. But this is from a type of ritual papyrus, and here's another picture of it. And up there in the top right-hand corner was a binu bird. That's what they consider to be their form of a phoenix. It looks like kind of like an egret or something along that line. So let's look at another genetic paper here. They tell you that the pre-dynastic now listen this through, the pre-dynastic of Upper Egypt and the late dynastic of Lower Egypt are more closely related to each other than any other population. Okay, break that down for you. When you go up the Nile, that's up because it's more uphill kind of. And so when they say Upper Egypt, that's there, which is more southern. Well, we think that's down on a map or whatever looking at it, but it's not. That's Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And they tell you that the pre-dynastic of Upper Egypt and the late dynastic of Lower Egypt are more closely related to any other population. There are a lot of people say, well, upper was this, that, and the other, and da-da-da. No, we've looked at the way that they looked, the first dynastic Egyptians, the ones that had put it all together and so on. They even say it goes back to pre-dynastic. We'll look at more information about that here in a minute. But those have more correlation than others that are right around there. Well, it's because they've made comparative study with ancient Libyan skeletons and ancient people that are farther down there, where you would think of Carthage and so on, and these people that are known now as the Amazigh are the barbarous people from there. But that's kind of a derogatory term, for they call themselves the Amazigh. And you know them also as being a large component of what were the Moors of ancient days, and these Caucasians. And of course, there's an interjection back into Africa they found that dates to some 30,000 BC, and it contains some of these people. Then there's a later integration. In fact, they found recently, to correlate with this whole migrative theory that they're about to talk about in a second, what correlates to it is the ancient people that lived around the Black Sea is where they talk about that's where all blue-eyed people came from at one time, or that all blue-eyed people today are related to some people that some 8,000 BC lived around the Black Sea area, 8 to 10,000. So that puts you up there at Göbekli Tepe land, and then coming on down. And a recent paper from Israel, studies in Israel, show that about 6,500 BC, and so that predates this kind of, there was these same people that came down through there, and they correlated to going with the Natufians and these other people that are already there. And they said the people that are already there weren't showing the blue-eyed, blonde-haired type trait, but these new people definitely show up, and they note it coming in at this late of a time. And it's like, well, it's 6,000 years ago, so 4,000 BC. And then all of a sudden they're all over the place. Now this would have been what you call Canaanites and Phoenicians, really, though. But swathing through that area and going, and how far did they go? Well, they kept going around the Mediterranean. There's nothing stopping them, and ran into Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, and there's connectives there. There's a lot of people that talk about the ancient people that were in Yemen too, and the Sabaean type people coming across the Horn, and that group became one, this group became one, then they started fighting amongst each other, and so on. Where do the Sumerians come in on this? They may have been the one that connected the Sabaeans through them. There's a lot of connections. A simple one I could give you is, you know those seals the Sumerians are famous for, and they reverse bas relief them and roll them in the clay, and then it prints a picture out. That's real cool. But that's actually the core drills that everybody talks about in ancient Egypt, and you pop them out and you go, look, there's a hole. Well, look, here's a little core. Those cores, all you got to do is you smooth it off some, and then you start drilling down into it. As you roll it out, it'll make a picture. And that's pretty damn neat. But both of them have it at the very first pre-dynastic, along with a Gibel Arok knife and stuff I've made other videos about. Won't need to go into it. The pre-dynastic of Upper Egypt and the late dynastic of Lower Egypt are more closely related to each other than any other population. But as a whole, they show ties with the European Neolithic, North Africa, modern Europe, and more remotely India, for a reason we've talked about in other vids I won't get into, but not at all with Sub-Saharan Africa. This was said back in 1993 in one that was about DNA and how they had figured out clusters and haplogroups at that time, and it was called Clines and Clusters versus Race, a test in ancient Egypt, the case of a death on the Nile by C. Loring Brace, again in 1993, where they were able to get things in at least mitochondrial DNA, and they're like, no. But people have still tried to put forth certain ideas. The moon, the man in the moon, Kingu. So if I can catch it at the right time, about every third frame isn't as blurry as this, but this is known as Ginger. This is the pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy that's found from the pre-dynastic times, and he's known as a pale leucoderm. Also, if you can see this little line right here, that's where he was stabbed through the shoulder, and it even broke his scapula or shoulder blade whenever it did so. They say that's got to be it. And in fact, he might have been part of the wars that led up to the unification of Egypt. And he's got curly blonde hair. And when we say curly, we say Caucasian curly hair. That's what it is. And it's blonde. People try to say, oh, mummification did this. This is a natural mummy. So it hasn't been rubbed even down with the pine tar type of stuff. But it did get turned into beef jerky. And we know how beef jerky gets a lot darker, especially where the blood pools in it and so on, even though it's kind of a pinkish color when it starts out. He's also found with a lot of pottery, and then there we go again with that pottery, and it leads back into these people too. But the symbology on the pottery I've showed connects on these people all the way up through there. And this ballerina girl, who they say is the primordial Isis, with her arms up like a bird doing this symbology. And I've told you what that connects to. Ancient rebirth and death rites. When you can go to this British Museum, this guy is there. But there's a lot of others. Like this is known as the Happy Mummy, and kind of famous. She's got auburn type hair. And sure, they put some henna on them and things like that. No, this straightforward, this Caucasian type hair, they can look at it under a microscope. The reason she looks so dark is that, hey, she got turned to beef jerky, and then after beef jerky, she was painted with this pine tar. What's weird is they've analyzed this pine tar now, and they say it comes from conifer trees, like pines and stuff, and somewhere up in Europe, and they've tried to pinpoint exactly which one. Supposedly they're doing tests now and burning certain ones and collecting the soot in a way, and then going to have to make a judgment on that, like over time, what it would end up looking like. But there's other components that are in it too that they put in there. There's all these other little ingredients. When they put it into a spectrum analyzer, it pops certain things, and then that was able to figure out that there's these major things in here, but it's these other elements. They're like, well, where does this all come from? So it's not just one thing that they made this shellac that they painted the mummies up with and then wrapped them up so they're all stuck with the paper thing over the ace bandage looking stuff all over. But you can see her reddish hair. But there's a lot of other ones. I mean, have you ever heard of Thuya and Yuya? Well, the grandparents or great-grandparents of King Tut, in the lineage and how it goes, and they know for sure and everything, and they're proud that they have their bodies, and it's one of the best ones kept. And this is the guy that looks like Abraham Lincoln. And yeah, he's got blonde hair. Thuya and Yuya both have blonde hair. So do other famous pharaohs. Yep, like Ramses himself. Yeah, Ramses the Great. Now, of course, they say he'd have to have been at least 88 or 92 years old whenever he died, so his hair has got to have been gray, but he dyed it back to the color of his youth. Well, what did they use? Well, they didn't use the yellowish form of henna, they used the reddish form of henna. So they say, well, he had to have been a redhead too. This is well known. And, even like Dr. Fletcher, Joanne Fletcher, that's what she did her dissertation on, is how these people had different colored hair and different colored wigs. And of course, being a woman, and she colors her own hair as bright red, which is probably more of an auburn color in reality. And she's, oh, look, here's a blonde wig. Oh, they've got them, and they've got the little gold clasps all over and everything. Some of them are braided in parts and other parts, and well, they show that in the art too. Yeah, that's what they had. That's what they did. These amazing blue-eyed Caucasians. I mean, there's SETI right there. A lot of people say you get at certain angles and look at him, and it looks more like Superman, Clark Kent type looking type guy. I don't see it so much as anything, but it's easy to see his phenotype. So let's go with genetics one more time here. The ancient Egyptians are most closely related to Neolithic and Bronze Age samples in the Levant, as well as Neolithic, Anatolian, and European populations. What? Yeah, and who is that? Well, it's the people derived out of early European hunter-gatherers. You would call them Cro-Magnons, but they still exist today, and so it can't be looked at as a separate thing because their haplogroup still exists today. So where did all this supposed big change come from, like I showed in a recent video? Well, no, it doesn't go the way that they said at all. I mean, out of Africa is pretty much popped. It went a whole different way. That's for another video. When comparing this pattern with modern Egyptians, we find that the ancient Egyptians are more closely related to all modern and ancient European populations that were tested. What? Well, now they've accrued even more data and everything and knows how it went and who Cro-Magnon and early European hunter-gatherers too. A lot of this is Max Planck Institute of Human Genetics and so on, but this was in 2017, so just recently. And the ancient Egyptian mummy genome suggests an increase of Sub-Saharan African ancestry in post-Roman periods. This is in a paper by Schunemann. What does that mean? That, well, people tried to say, well, it started out with a lot of black people mixed into it somehow, but no. And of course, the Nubians weren't even allowed in. There's like decrees for that, so it showed that that didn't happen. We look at what they started with, and there's some blonde hair and red hair and some blue eyes, and now we can actually see who this is, and they tell you they look like those old ancient Anatolians and European populations, Neolithic ones, all through the Bronze Age and Levant. All those biblical people, yeah, well, all the people of the Fertile Crescent. Look at the Sumerians, and they've got blue-eyed statues and everything. It could go worse if you looked up blue-eyed gods. You could see that some people that don't even have blue-eyed traits had that going on, but that's not for this video. Well, let's just read that one more time through, for it makes an important statement that some people try to breeze past. Ancient Egyptians are more closely related to Neolithic and Bronze Age samples in the Levant, as well as Neolithic, Anatolian, and European populations. Why? Because those are all the same people. Variation on the theme slightly, of course, but they're the same people, and this is the closest thing to it. Like they said the caucasians were. Well, who's that? That's people who live right in the Caucasus Mountains. It's real close to like Noah and where he landed with his ark, supposedly, too, but we're going back way before that when we talk about all this. They say when comparing the pattern with modern Egyptians, we find that the ancient Egyptians are more closely related to all modern and ancient European populations that we tested. So they're more related to the ancient ones and the modern ones of European. And they also made another statement, bland out, that there's a 1% connection. Mainly it appears in the Coptic people that are there currently. Genetics and haplogroups and connections off of that. But if anybody's thinking that it has to do with Sub-Saharans, no. In fact, Krauss himself, one of the lead guys there, said, well, if you're talking about African people, yeah, they were living in Africa and everything, but if you're talking about Sub-Saharans, then no. One of the other blue-eyed statues is actually, oh, you hate him, Sayuwas. One of his favorite statues, because he was with the people that found it and he thought it was the greatest thing, pulled it out in the open and had the blue eyes and da-da-da. And there's a video you can find where he actually goes and they put it in its place inside the new museum and everything. It's pretty cool. But it's another one of the statues. I believe there's some 20-something of them. I don't want to misquote it. 26 or something total of these different guys that have this effect. And the ones they're showing you are the main ones and people that are well known and ones that are in the museum. You can just walk by and take a picture of it. So it's not that somebody made a case for it, but this would actually stand up in court. That's certain. So here's something from 2018. Of the 114 mtdna genomes now available from the North African ancient human remains, of all of them that they found, only one belongs to an African lineage, L3, observed in a skeleton from Abusir el-Melek. Well, what are they saying? Well, the deep presence of Eurasian mtdna lineages in northern Africa has therefore been clearly established. What? Yeah, in the Wayback Wind machine, the same people that make up the Eurasians, the same people that make up those same type of people, had come through in a wave before at about 30,000 BC. Now, comes through later in there, and then L3. L3 is not known to be Sub-Saharans. Correct me if I'm wrong. But there's only one that's actually a lineage from the 30,000 BC African lineage, who would also apparently be a Caucasian. But then what are all the rest of them? Well, the deep presence of Eurasian mtdna lineages in northern Africa has therefore been clearly established, like a blanket over it. What's the name of this paper? The biological sexing of a 4,000-year-old Egyptian mummy head to the potential of nuclear DNA and recovery from the most damaged limited forensic specimens in 2018. This is the one where it had Jehudi knocked with it. But they've got other ones, like I told you, that they've compared it to all around. And in a comparison situation, they go, oh, we've only found one ever that was something else. All the other ones are this, what? Early European hunter-gatherers and lineages that come off that. That's because the earliest modern human is Cro-Magnon. Yeah. At basically 50,000 years ago. Predates anybody else modern at all. The oldest Negroid type is 4,400 BC. Everything that they've found before that is proto, meaning, well, you can't just suddenly get a non-proto before that. Oldest one they found even of that is 9100 BC at Iru. So, no, because they're talking about, well, these people were in that area before then. Way before then. And then there's an influx of other people, and then together they form Voltron. So, once you figure out all that situation, it kind of burns away all that BS that you may have been taught or somebody tried to prove to you. And this is done from the picture sequence and genetic knowledge of Egyptologist 7. Look up her channel if you aren't aware of it. But hey, you look at her moniker here that she goes, and it's got that blue eye. I'll be damned. That looks like that belongs in ancient Egypt, just like we just looked at. Anyhow, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, and we're just going to move on to another video and topic. Peace.